So we're here today, Lauren Thompson, founding director of Roots and Futures, joined by co-host here, Harry Spider from the Forward Institute. Today we're joined by Scott Knoll, CEO of the East Midlands Chamber of Commerce. Going to be talking today about unlocking the economy. I also learned a fact the other day that you've got Nottingham Forest and Nottingham County.
Really?
But Nottingham City Council own the county, and the county owns the forest. Even though the football stations, when you look on a football
stadium, it's in West Bridgeford, isn't it?
Yeah, they sit opposite each other on the map.
Yes,
So I was at Palm at Nottingham University the other day, and they were sat opposite. They've got this big map that's plastic printed, and then they project on the top of it. And then, as said on sports, really interesting, and we need to get Ben to come and talk from here because he's now chairman of Eastward FC. And so he's going through that whole thought process now on actually how can you bring in and rejuvenate the community.
And Notts County is the oldest football club in the league, isn't it?
Are they in the Meadows, Notts County?
No,
that's down West Bridgeford.
Yeah.
So when I went to see Punch the other day, so they went to their press evening on Wednesday, so that's at Nottingham Playhouse.
Yeah.
And that's obviously talking about this man, Jacob, who basically killed a man, James Hodgkinson, in one punch.
Yeah.
It did a huge sketch there about the Meadows because that's where the person grew up.
And the Meadows has always been seen in Nottingham as a challenging neighbourhood.
And it was talking in there about there's three gangs and they all wear different colours. So I think you've got the Meadows in blue, St Anne's in red, and there's another one in black, and I'm probably never going to can't remember it. I don't know my gang law that well.
It wasn't in Stenton, was it?
You know more than you know more than I do, Laura.
Yeah, well, but it was just, it's that gang culture. And then also, because a bit that sort of started to worry me, so my lad Hugh, he's 14, he goes to school in Derbyshire that's not part of this, but the red and blue games have come to Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire. And so that is where you've got schools that are automatically put into red or blue, and then you get points for if you hit somebody, if you steal something from somebody, if you stab somebody. No, and the red and blue game, so it's a TikTok game, that actually started in London and somebody got stabbed in the neck. Oh, gosh. So
quite different to my school time.
Yeah, I went to a tough comprehensive and we did that, but we didn't do that, of course, before social media.
Yeah.
Well, I went to Noel Baker, and the sort of, I suppose, the school that was sort of, you fight against, you compete against was Merrill. And so you actually just used to, there's a point where the two school adjoining fields were next to each other. And you literally would just stand either side of this big metal fence, and you're from Merrill, you're from Noel Baker, and maybe there'd be an odd fisticuff, but it wouldn't be knife crime, and it wouldn't be this incentivization to go out and actually physically maim somebody or take their life.
Didn't have that in rural Derbyshire.
No, tell us about rural Derbyshire, then, your background then.
Well, there wasn't any. It was just school was school.
Yeah.
You probably had a little bit of sports rivalry with, I went to Highfields in Matlock.
Right.
And you had a bit of rivalry with the secondary school at Bakewell and the one at Wirksworth.
There's miles between that as well, isn't there?
But that was it. And we were a rugby school, so you had, I think we were rugby and cricket. We didn't do football, which was always disappointing. And that was it really. You had a bit of rivalry around, but probably because of the distance as well.
Yeah.
Meant that actually, if you're 13 or 14, it's quite hard outside of sports games to see people from rival schools because it felt like it was the other side of the planet.
Yeah.
There was none of that. I mean, that's shocking, isn't it?
Yeah, but it really is.
Social media has a lot to answer for, doesn't it?
Well, but then what goes to me is like the social media ban. Actually, should we have it or not for 16 and unders? Do you have a strong view on that, or?
I don't think I have a strong view on it. I can understand it.
Yeah.
My wife and I, we don't have kids, but talking to my friends that do and have children that are, some of them are early teens, the challenge around when they get a mobile phone, how they've tried to almost put it off as long as possible, knowing that some of the challenges that come with it, but then, their children feel disenfranchised if they're on the bus and they're the only one who doesn't have a phone, all that peer pressure and so on. But then it's almost like the, government making strides towards regulation, isn't it, around social media? I don't know. Even from a work perspective, I don't use social media outside of work. I use LinkedIn for work.
Yeah.
Because it mostly seems like a good vehicle in terms of sharing those key messages and driving engagement and stuff. But I don't know. I rely on my wife, who uses Facebook, to tell me about things that I probably aren't really bothered about anyway.
So
old school friends and what their children are doing. And I think, well, if I haven't seen you for 20 years, don't put this in, by the way. If I haven't seen you for 20 years, I'm probably all right.
I'm just thinking of all the shadow WhatsApp groups that you're potentially on now. And
I'm really not. I'm a really straightforward sort of human when it comes to things like social media.
Yeah.
I have a WhatsApp group with my friends, and that's about it.
Yeah.
A couple for work, and that's it, really. So, but I also, you can see, even on a family level, I can see the challenges that social media brings and what that's done to people fairly close to the family. Whether it's around, I suppose grooming might be a bit too strong, it might not be, and things like that. And you think, it's just a bit of a minefield, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really difficult.
And I think it's very different if you grow up with it compared to, I suspect neither of us grew up with it. I got my first mobile phone when I was probably about 26, 27.
Gosh.
And I had one of those Nokia bricks, which actually my dad still has. And always remarks how no one ever rings him. He sometimes asks how he can pay for his car parking on it. You can't. But he also reminds me that the battery lasts about 3 months. And he goes, I get by just fine on it. And you think, that simpler sort of approach. But then you can also see the benefit, whilst there's an unhealthy side of it, you think, actually keeping people in touch that live on different continents and family members, you think, brilliant. That is a complete game changer, isn't it, over the last sort of 20 years or so. So it's balanced.
And I think like social media in the sort of context of business and sort of engaging with wider sort of community is really interesting. You're right. I mean, I think for people who were born when social media was already set up, they've lived their life. They've not known anything different on it. But for those who were born before social media, it's a friend and an enemy, I think, on it, and is how we catalyse the benefits of it. So I think staying connected to a group of people, whether that's local, national, and international, is good at times of crisis like COVID. And who knows where this sort of international crisis will end to have alerts on your phone to say, this is happening and you need to be aware of it is good and positive. I think for using social media for business and to promoting products or services, that's also good. Although LinkedIn, as you said, is an interesting platform, but the criticism of LinkedIn is just been used for people to self-promote themselves as a brand. Almost like you wake up in the morning, aren't I great? And then you have lots of their friends saying, yeah, you are great on it. So,
or pictures of coffee
or pictures of themselves on a train and oversharing sort of stuff. So I think the sort of guardrails and the parameters are really important, but driving business and connectivity and getting messages across and creating a community are all really good, whether you're in business or quasi-business. But I think that regulation piece that Lauren said is challenging, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think if you regulate, then people generally trying to find a workaround around that regulation on it.
Well, it's that polarization, and I'm probably complete opposite because I quite enjoy social media, and actually, in terms of being a startup business, without social media, I wouldn't have had as big a platform as I've got now to really sort of deliver what my audience wants or talk about things. And I'm probably the people that you're talking about, like, I've just had a cup of coffee today.
You don't say that. No, you never say that.
And this morning, I've just woken up and I've just had a cup of coffee. I tend to use it to sort of to promote other organisations. It creates that dialogue. And then I think in terms of that social media campaign, so I think one of the things I wanted to talk about today was actually we've got this sort of real change in dynamics at the moment in terms of internationally. We've got a lot going off with Donald Trump, that Americanization, the sort of Middle East sort of. We've got the war with Iran and where that sort of goes, and the Strait of Hormuz closing, and how that's really starting to impact. And then for me, like I was just looking last night in Denby, they've just gone into administration. And they're actually now starting to use the power of social media to create this real campaign around, we don't want to go into administration. We've got 217 years of trading.
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to social media has been powerful for me in terms of starting up. How powerful do you think it's going to be around Denby? And I suppose for you, Scott, you're CEO of the, Chamber of Commerce, you must be seeing real big impact with business now and international trade. So I think I'm trying to marry those two things together there. Yeah,
and they are inextricably linked, aren't they? I mean, certainly, and it's the same narrative that you're seeing in the national media. One of the challenges for Denby was around energy volatility. Yeah. Well, of course, that was mostly pre-Middle East conflict. But, and I don't know much about making ceramics, but I would imagine, kilns and ovens being on 24/7 at very high temperature probably sounds quite expensive.
Yeah.
And Denby, of course, it's been for more than 200 years, it's been this huge sort of national institution that happens to be based in Derbyshire. We work with Denby in terms of supporting their exporting. They buy things like certificates of origin offers and so forth when they're exporting overseas.
So you've got the energy shock of what's going on at the moment. And that's having an impact on petrol prices, on industry. In some parts of Southeast Asia, they're already telling people not to work on a Friday, to shorten the working week, don't travel unless it's necessary. I think government is actually hinting at that in this country. So you've got all those energy shocks that we had. If you go back to 1973 and the oil crisis that was there many years ago, but that world was politically very stable. What we have now is a world that is unstable. And we don't have a partner in the United States. Even Donald Trump's best friends would not say that stability is one of his greatest virtues. Is that we have leaders who are willing to intervene, and for lots of different reasons in different parts of the world that have an impact here. So we've got political instability and economic instability, and that recipe is never good on it, and it has an impact on what we're doing in the East and West Midlands. But the other thing around it, and this is the world and countries that we live in, because of migration since the Second World War, what's happening in Iran and the Middle East, because of diaspora communities here, in Derby, in Nottingham, in Birmingham, it actually has an impact on them. That's the Muslim communities here, because they will have a view on it. So that adds to the local instability or potential instability here. And I also think if you look at the microcosm of like places like Derby, Nottingham, and Derby and Birmingham, Derby, and Nottingham. Also, you want to invest in places that are stable, that are politically stable. And if you have instability in those places, and who knows where the local election is going to lead us in terms of this multi-party system that we have now rather than Labour and Conservative, that also, the investment decisions that people bet on, they want stability. And what we haven't got at the moment in East and West Midlands is stability, because we got a global crisis and we got the local elections coming up, and we've got a government, even 2 years in, that I wouldn't describe as being particularly stable.
Yeah.
So we add all that up, it leaves lots of uncertainty.
It's an interesting point, and there's two that sort of want to sort of surface there in terms of what you're talking about with the 1970s Muslim communities. I was reading a wonderful article the other day which was saying actually this is the first time that a lot of people who have sort of been born to those that have migrated to this country have actually seen the instability that their parents experienced. So actually, what is that going to mean in terms of how they start thinking about the country, the cohesion, what that sort of being united and being British is about? But also, I think in times of great crisis, and we saw this in COVID and so forth, is it catalysed quite a lot? So I'd be really interested actually in terms of where is this rallying where are our successes at the moment? I suppose, Scott, you talked about quite a lot of challenges on businesses at the moment. Where do you think those sort of green shoots are, or what are these opportunities starting to emerge?
I think despite all of those things, you've still actually got investment taking place.
You're right.
You've still got deals being done. Talking to some of our members in professional services, the lawyers that specialise in commercial property, there's still, transactions taking place.
Yeah.
Do things take a bit longer than they used to do? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Even talking to individual businesses around investment decisions, there's always a reason to wait and put it off, isn't it? There's always going to be a spring statement. There's always going to be a Chancellor's budget. Frankly, if it sounds like a good idea to invest in whatever you're investing into, is waiting to see what the landscape looks like a good idea or a bad idea? If it was me personally, I'd probably be saying, well, we should still invest in that because the political landscape will be what it will be. I think what's become really evident, I mean, I oversay this, is that, business's currency is confidence. Mm-hmm. And therefore, everything you were talking about, which is about a landscape that doesn't necessarily create an air of confidence, that's the thing that then leads to, delays in investment and delays in projects and so forth. And that just feels that instability has escalated, since the pandemic, since the exit from the European Union. There's always been almost like a perma-crisis to navigate as well as invest. We undertake something called a quarterly economic survey. It's what it says on the tin. It's not terribly imaginatively titled. But what we're seeing from businesses is there is that hesitancy around recruitment. There is that hesitancy. And our latest set of data is almost prior to the Middle East conflict. So, the next quarter will look even more interesting in terms of how is it affecting investment and so forth. But actually, the last 10 years, you've had for greater and greater protractions around investment decisions and so forth. I guess the corollary is you're also seeing, as a chamber, we cover 3 cities and 3 counties. We've got 2 of those counties now fully devolved with the county combined authority and a regional mayor. Leicester and Leicestershire still on that journey. But you can see the divergence in investment between not just Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire and Leicester and Leicestershire, but when you look nationally. And of course, when you hear the rhetoric now from central government, when they talk about the East Midlands, they're really talking about Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire. Yeah. They're not talking about Lincolnshire. They're not talking about Leicestershire. They're not talking about Rutland. So, so there's a bit of a perception piece there that needs to be done around the East Midlands, that Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire getting huge investments. You can see the impact a regional mayor is making. But actually, and Lincolnshire, of course, has a fairly new devolution deal.
Yeah.
But Leicester and Leicestershire, it's the biggest economy in the East Midlands. It's a huge city, very diverse city. But actually, if we're measuring devolution and the investment benefits that come from that, if it's being measured in years, what are we getting instead in the meantime? Central government can't overlook it.
Yeah.
And there are some really big investment hubs in the East Midlands as well.
Yeah.
You have the Freeport, you've got the airport, second or rather the largest freight airport, which is doing some really amazing, interesting stuff. You look at that sort of golden triangle around Junction 23 to sort of 24, tons of stuff happening.
Yeah.
Huge investment opportunities. So despite all the challenges, there's still some good stuff happening. And I think there are lots of opportunities for the East Midlands.
Yeah.
Do you think, Scott, that the East Midlands struggles in the context of bordering the West Midlands with this huge city with with 1.4 million people that's just going to have a new train station, thanks to George Osborne, many years ago. And then you've got the Northwest, and then you've got South Yorkshire, which has Leeds, Manchester and Leeds respectively, and Birmingham. And those are big, powerful regions with a lot of investment going in, primarily to the cities that are there. So when I look at Birmingham, for example, of course, there's lots of challenges in the city that have been well documented in the press, but there's huge investment flowing into Birmingham in terms of property. And you're absolutely right, because if you're a property developer, you're not going to bet on like 3 years. You're going to bet on like 20, 30, 50 years hence. And you factor stuff in. But also the development of Birmingham City Football Club in the sports quarter, the fastest growing tech sector in the whole country. And it is a global city on it. So, and it's a provocation, but it's a gentle provocation for me in terms of the East Midlands, given that you're penned in by all these spaces and places. Do you think there's more to be done in terms of selling the narrative of the East Midlands and what it is, its USP in a way, in the same way that other regions have?
It's almost like we plan these things sometimes, isn't it? So one of the things that the County Combined Authority has been doing, and I've been chairing this, it's pulling together an East Midlands strategic place narrative, because actually recognition that actually as a region, perhaps that identity has not been that clear, particularly the further south that you go. But I think the East Midlands it's starting to, but there's greater opportunity around establishing it with sort of areas of national significance. So I think logistics, all the stuff that's happening around the airport, it's becoming a national hub for logistics. I think there's a great opportunity around AI, data, digital, and of course you've seen some announcements around data centres across the East Midlands. I think that's really a really positive development. I think you've still got re-emerging opportunities around things like textiles in Leicester and Leicestershire. I was only talking to a potential investor who's looking at Leicester and Leicestershire and textiles. That had a huge tradition in Leicester and Leicestershire around that. So really interesting to see people going, I'm thinking of investing in a new factory to do this. And you think, that's brilliant. Yeah. So, and then I think there's one of the failed opportunities for the East Midlands, completely out of its control, was HS2. So you mentioned your lovely new train station. We, as a chamber, we were very pro the economic benefits of HS2. I would never comment on the route. Absolutely not qualified to do that. We had some members that were very, particularly where the route was going through the middle of commercial property and all the difficulties that brought. But on the surface, actually having that running through the East Midlands with train stations, okay. But then, the regional mayor's pulling together a very ambitious transport plan. I think there's an opportunity around something of national significance around clean energy. We've got the Ratcliffe-on-Soar power station that's been decommissioned or in the process of being decommissioned. Something around alternative energy sources. There's been lots of discussions about that. So I think there's some really big opportunities. It feels like they're all starting to gain momentum all at the same time. And I think sites like East Midlands Freeport are absolutely essential in terms of, drawing in investment from overseas. They're not about displacement, it's about new investment. And having that site literally on within the footprint of the airport in part, clearly makes sense to be able to do that. If you look forward perhaps 3-4 years, the East Midlands should look and feel very different to what it does today.
And I think it's interesting what you said, because it goes back to actually Lauren and Roots and Futures, that place nutrition that you speak about, which is, I think, is a novel and really interesting, fascinating theorem. Because when I look at the East Midlands, as someone who's grown up in the West Midlands and spent a lot of time in London and internationally as well, for me, the East Midlands is more than just the M1 when you go through. It'll be a mistake to think of it. The US equivalent would be flyover states. So like New York, DC, you go to LA and San Francisco, that they don't matter. It does matter. And I think it matters in lots of reasons for all the things you've said, Scott. But also the people who live in the East Midlands matter in terms of skills, in terms of connectivity to high growth areas. And also not forgetting that East Midlands is Rolls-Royce is based in Derby, which is a global brand on it. And also not so in living memory, like they had 2 football clubs that were also certainly European brands and global brands in Derby County and Nottingham Forest. And of course, Leicester won the Premiership.
Not that many years ago.
Not many years ago. So I think for me, I always think about places catalyzing their assets, right? So what are your assets, and then joining it together, because sometimes in big cities and in smaller cities, it's all very fragmented. And I think this role, I see the work that you're doing in the Chamber is absolutely critical in convening and helping to build that narrative, because all places need a story. And Lauren, you spoke about Denby earlier on, this heritage brand, and I think to save Denby, crowdfunding is really important, because nostalgia and heritage are really important, and there's like 2 different things. But rallying people around saving, whether it's a brand like Denby or your local football club or your local community centre, that are all anchors in it, is really important. And because we started with social media earlier on, therefore you can use social media to bring people together and to support businesses, and that binds that brand to the person who lives there, I think. And I don't know if that's like part of your place nutrition, Lauren, in terms of how you can catalyze these things. And
and for me, place nutrition is that sort of concept where you're sort of taking a place and really understanding sort of what nourishes it, and actually how do you sort of restore that social contract, I suppose, between businesses and actually the communities and the makers and the artists and those that are around. And that sort of really focuses on working with executives, working with procurement teams, looking at sort of those sort of procurement channels, those sort of existing spend lines within an organisation. And then taking something like, you're procuring tables and chairs at scale, instead of importing them from China or elsewhere or IKEA because it's more cost effective, even putting 5-10% aside and spending that with a local artist, maker, it's 5-10 grand that could be going to a carpenter in the local economy. So it's trying to create that self-sustaining and I suppose buffering against some of those sort of more international shocks, but plays into what you're saying about Denby in terms of actually if we've just got some more restaurants, canteens, cafes, it's not just households that should be buying an extra mug, plate to sort of support. It's actually an opportunity for all our businesses. But I also want to pick up on the point around stories. So I know, Scott, you've been to Chatsworth House recently. I got the opportunity to go last night to see their new sort of House of Stories I was going to say campaign. It isn't. It's an exhibition. Wonderful, just in terms of opening up Chatsworth House and seeing some rare books. For me, I'm into lapidary now, so I was taking pictures of all the stones and gems that they've got on display. So what do exhibitions like Chatsworth House mean in terms of actually that tourist economy, arts and culture? Some of the things just build on that, really. Scott, to write your views.
Yeah, Chatsworth, we don't live far away, actually. So really lucky. I think, whenever I must contribute about 0.1% to their GDP. So every time we go, there's a piece of clothing that has to, not for me, of course, that gets bought from the stable shop and, whether it's barber or something else. But I think the stories, I think the cultural bit is really interesting. And it does build on the sport narrative as well. You think about, Robin Hood. How many TV shows and movies have there been about Robin Hood? It's probably, it's a generational thing, isn't it? It's almost like Batman. There'll always be a new version of Robin Hood, whether it's TV, movies. I think there might be another Robin Hood movie coming out soon. I'm sure there is.
A spoiler.
That's really important. Do we capitalise on that as much? But I think it's, you perhaps do in part, but it isn't necessarily all, and that's why, place narrative is really important, is that you pull all of the stories together and able to sort of present it in a coherent way. Places like Chatsworth House, really important, massively important from a visitor economy perspective. But of course, it's not just about, because frankly, Chatsworth is such an iconic brand, it will probably be okay. But it's all about the supply chain, isn't it? Yeah. The SME supply chain that contribute to the, to the overall product. I was talking to one of our members who's last week, and they're investing in an old bank in Bakewell in Derbyshire, and we were helping them with some planning challenges and so forth. But they're investing £2 million in a building that has been derelict for nearly a decade. Yeah. But when you actually, and it's not just about, it's great because there's a derelict building and they're turning it into a high-end sort of restaurant. But you go, actually, it's the job creation in an area that's quite hard to navigate. If you're a young person and you don't drive, that's quite hard to navigate around the Peak District. It's great if you drive, not so much if you don't. If you're relying on public transport, where there's, perhaps the routes are not as plentiful as they used to be. And obviously, commercial transport routes are much more challenged from the commerciality element of it. So you go, brilliant, you're creating 50 jobs. But then when they talk to you about the impact on the supply chain and the millions of pounds that will put into the supply chain, whether you're the grocer or the people who supply the tableware, or you think, actually, that one investment and the tendrils that it has into the economy, and that's just one project, and you think, that how you capture all of that, I think the visitor economy is massively important to the area, hugely so. We're in Nottingham at the moment. We mentioned Robin Hood. You've got, great facilities like Nottingham Castle. You've got, the cultural offer in the city, but also in the county. And at the moment, it does. I live in the East Midlands, but it does feel slightly fragmented sometimes when you're. I have to look at 3 or 4 websites to find out what I've been tasked to make sure we're doing something interesting at the weekend, and at some point, can that all be brought together, but without losing your local distinctiveness? Yeah. Because that's really important as well.
I think there were several things that you said there, Scott, was really interesting. The start of the discussion, you spoke about SMEs, And sometimes it's forgotten about the placemaking role of SMEs, because they're the ones that are embedded within communities. They're the ones who tend to recruit locally. They're the ones that keep businesses going to provide salaries that are spent within local economies. And some of these SMEs have been going for like 100, 150 years. Yeah. And when we talk about businesses, often we automatically migrate to like big businesses like Mondelez, for example, in Birmingham, who used to be Cadbury's, or Rolls-Royce. They're big sort of iconic businesses, but we tend to forget those smaller businesses that have been around that hold places together. And I think that's really important. And the visitor economy, as you spoke about, is really important. Birmingham has so many assets going for it. The jewellery quarter in Birmingham has been pumping out high quality, excellent jewellery and silver for like 200 plus years. And whenever you go on Antiques Road, you watch Antiques Roadshow on a Sunday.
I'm of an age where that's the thing now.
That's the thing.
I look forward to it.
I love Antiques Roadshow now.
I know somebody who used to metal press the Hornby trains, and their entire garage is full of the original metal pressings.
But that's the thing. Yeah. So when they're looking at a piece of silverware and they turn it over, the anchor sign, this has come out of Birmingham. So Birmingham, through that small district, has shaped the world. And heritage, therefore, I was in the jewellery quarter yesterday for a meeting, and it has become a place where people go to and walk around, and there's restaurants and there's nice cafes, and you can spend the whole. And similarly, in different parts of Birmingham, it's not just the city centre that is important, but for Birmingham, it's also the neighbourhoods that are important, and how we can drive footfall into those neighbourhoods, into restaurants and cafes and stuff like that. Because when you go to New York, all right, you may stay in Manhattan, but you'll go to Brooklyn because you've heard of this like really fantastic restaurant that's there. So you do a trek there. And when you go to San Francisco, you land at the airport, but you don't stay in the city center because you can want to go to Castro or the Mission District, which are Latino and gay neighborhoods in San Francisco. And they become a destination. They benefit because businesses go there. And so I think in places and cities, it's not just the city centre and these sort of high-rise developments. It's what's happening in neighbourhoods. Because as you were saying, Scott, if it's sometimes easier if you invest in hubs, like mini hubs within places, because you can walk to work or you can get a bus. Sometimes when you're travelling from out of in a rural area, you're trying to get into city. It's not that easy. So I think that entrepreneurship that people, I've detected, and it's only anecdotal evidence, that since COVID, people will have a job, but they'll also have a side hustle that they want to develop. And I think that's really interesting. And people across all age groups are doing stuff and releasing their inner entrepreneurism to create something and to make stuff, which I think has to be applauded.
Absolutely.
Really.
And I think technology has enabled that, hasn't
Absolutely
it?
That.
It'd be interesting to see where we are in a couple of years' time, as AI further develops, enabling the side hustles, it accelerates startups in terms of progress. The bit I think is quite interesting. I live in a small Derbyshire market town. The market towns now, to me, feel quite different to cities. They don't just feel like a smaller version. I look across the Derbyshire towns that I know best, Bakewell and Buxton and Belper and, Ashbourne and so forth. They all feel different. They've all got their own sort of mini identity. They're all very touristy. Chesterfield, for example. But actually, they feel very different now to the cities. And I think it's a very different offer. It's much more sort of bespoke and tailored. It's much more independent driven. You've seen the withdrawal of some of those anchor stores, the national brands from some of those smaller towns where the footfall perhaps, fell below the parameters of wherever the red line was on whether stores endure or not. And And, you've seen a real, I think, an expansion in terms of, things that drive footfall, festivals, food and drink fairs, the stuff I like going to at a weekend. There's always something to do and somewhere to go. But you go to those places, you spend your money in those places. But I just think they do feel very different now to the city centres.
It's really interesting you say that, because when you were talking, I was thinking, actually, that same pattern is also happening in cities post-COVID, is that the city centre is emptying out, partly in Birmingham because you've got the mailbox, you've got the Bullring, you've got New Street, and then New Street Station, then New Street and Corporation Street have really suffered from that. And there's plans to do it. But what's happened since COVID is that neighbourhoods have become an identity, have got an identity. So Kings Heath, where I live, has a street festival that people from all over Birmingham and beyond go there. There's businesses that have been created that on the high street by younger entrepreneurs that when you speak to them, they say they get footfall from people from outside Birmingham because they've heard of this place that sells amazing like breakfasts and pastries and stuff like that. And again, using social media to promote it.
Yeah.
But people are traveling to seek these places out, and that's having an impact in the desirability of those neighborhoods and just driving investment into those neighborhoods. And a good example is Sturchley in Birmingham, which used to be this gritty neighborhood with industry, small industry alongside small terrace houses. Even in like 15 years ago, that has just been voted the best neighborhood in the West Midlands.
Brilliant.
Because it's been transformed into this sort of bougie place where there's smaller independents, like restaurants that are fantastic, cafes that are brilliant. It's got a tap room that it has the benefit of being just opposite a train station that is doing amazing stuff and growing year on year. And it's become this hub of independent activity that people can spend the whole day there. Within 15 years, that's happened. And that's been driven, I think, largely by millennials and Gen Z in the main, backed by investors, to create that identity. So places can change and they become attractive to entrepreneurs that become successful businesses and employ staff. And I think that's something to be applauded. I think that's spirit.
Yeah, it's something to be applauded. But then part of me sort of worries that what does that actually mean for our city centres? Yeah, and we've talked loads about what Birmingham, actually how does it sort of monopolise the Ozzy Osbourne effect? Very similar to you. I live in the suburbs. I'm in Chellaston. I'm right in South Derbyshire. I've got Infinity Park, one of the investment zones, sort of encroaching on my doorstep at the moment. If I go for a night out, I'll go to Melbourne, but I won't go into the city centre. It's too difficult on the buses. It's too expensive. And then almost actually starting to see, say, with Derby, a bit more of a ghost town for me.
Yes.
But then I look at Nottingham, and I keep saying it's on its Belle Epoque because actually it's busy Monday to Sunday. You can't get to the bar for love nor money. And I'm trying to sit here and think, well, does that mean that actually the suburbs of Nottingham aren't taking away that city centre activity, or have they got their?
I don't think it's taking away. Right? I think it's a different offer, and I think people are really open to the different offers. In my, I don't know if I call it prime, single going out career with my friends when I was much younger.
I don't know where this is going, Scott.
But we would always, the destinations were Chesterfield and Derby.
Yeah.
Occasionally Nottingham.
I can't imagine a night out in Chesterfield.
It was interesting back in the day. But all of these places, including where I live, you drive around at a weekend. Actually, early evening, restaurants are really busy. There's very few restaurants where I live, whatever your budget is, whatever your tastes are, that you could simply walk up and say, table for two. You have to make a reservation much more than a few days in advance, or even deciding to do it on the day. But once you then get past that sort of, 9 o'clock sort of time, and if you're driving, if I'm coming back from a work event and it might be a Friday night and you're driving through at 11 o'clock at night, not a lot going on. Whereas, of course, in my day, sounds really old, doesn't it? But actually, you went out at 7 o'clock at night. That was your sort of starting position. But it feels like that's all been sort of flipped on its head, really.
I think that's really interesting in terms of observations. So I think in Birmingham, there's two different things going on. In the city centre, there's lots of investment in buildings, in infrastructure, as we've spoken about. And so developers are betting on the economy in Birmingham continuing to grow. I mean, the professional services, legal, accountancy, so on and so forth. And you feel that when you go into Birmingham in Colmore Row and Paradise Development and Brindley Place on it. And then you've got these big shopping complexes too. The real challenge, I think, in Birmingham is what happens when you come out of New Street Station and you walk down New Street and Corporation Street, which were back in the day, they were like the places that you wanted to go to. And there's a hollowing out there of spaces. It's pretty unattractive for visitors to come in. So they have to battle through New Street and get into Colmore Row and Paradise and Brindley Place and think, wow, this is like a premier European city, which, I think it is. So the challenge is to attract businesses there, but actually our habits have changed a lot. So we shop online, we can click of a button, we can get stuff in. We don't necessarily have to go into what was the old Rackham's on Corporation Street, which was the place to go if you want to say to people, I've made it, to get a sofa from Rackham's. I'm sure in Derby they used to have like big furniture stores, and in Nottingham too. So I think there's clearly investment coming in to Birmingham city centre, which is only going to accelerate with HS2 gets to completion, where Birmingham becomes like zone 4 to London. But so I think we need to protect our centre core, because that's often the transportation hub that people come in. And if people come into Derby and to Nottingham and Birmingham and see a hollowed out city centre, that's not going to leave a very good impression on them in terms of the visitor economy. But also I think we need to go with the flow. So neighbourhoods and towns that you mentioned, Scott, they're developing their own identity. And I get the feeling that's been a very organic development.
Yeah, right.
It's happened and it's emerged because people think these places are nice places to live. We're going to do this. I think it's accelerated since COVID, and what people are doing is different. And I think we need to applaud that entrepreneurism and enterprise, because that creates jobs, perhaps not in the number that manufacturing has created in the past, but nevertheless. That's something, and places like that are developing their own narrative as well, right? As places to visit, and I think it's catalysing the assets that you have.
Yeah. So we've covered quite a lot today in terms of, we've gone from everything in terms of instability to talking about social media, place, the investment, the sort of success stories for the East and the West Midlands, touched on things like safety as well and sort of future-proofing. So just to sort of conclude, I'll start with you, Harris, and then you can finish, Scott.
Sure.
What 3 things do you think we should do moving forward and taking that to unlock the economy and sort of sustain that inclusive growth? What's those radical changes?
So this is what private sector businesses have been saying to me in Birmingham. What they want from the city is vision and leadership. That's 2. A vision for the city and effective leadership. That's going to be very difficult because in the future, because Birmingham is hopefully emerging from commissioners, and the May elections are going to be quite interesting. Let's see what emerges from that. So vision and leadership. But also, I think from government, they're looking for a government that is friendly to businesses. So Scott mentioned the additional costs that are in setting up businesses. So whether you're a large business or a small business, you still got to pay those costs. So I think I'd be looking to government, yes, to encourage the growth industries, but don't forget the industries that are the bedrock of places like Birmingham. And it's like manufacturing, it's automotive. Yeah, those things may get smaller, but they still employ huge numbers of people. So how is government going to support those businesses? And I think the final thing I would say, and this is probably like 4 things, but for the West Midlands and Birmingham, it's important to catalyse your assets that you have already. And we've spoken about those. So what is the brand of Birmingham? You know, how can you then use that to bring inward investment in? And I think there's a lot of commitment to building that brand in Birmingham, because once we get that right, then we are really flying as a city and as a region.
Let's go.
I'd build on what Harrison was saying there. So I think one of the things that you touched on earlier, the importance of the SME. You know, the SMEs make up 90-odd% of the East Midlands economy. Be really interested to for government to be really clear how it's going to stimulate the private sector. You know, we're facing only a few weeks from now. You know, business support is it's not dropping off a cliff, but it is going to be vastly reduced for 26-27 compared to this financial year. That, you know, central government needs to look at that and say, actually, you know, how do we stimulate the private sector? You know, I think government's role is you create the landscape that allows businesses to thrive, and then you get out of the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, but actually, you know, despite a national government that is talking quite endlessly about economic growth, it feels slightly odd that at the same time, you know, for austerity reasons, but you're vastly reducing the business support landscape. And for some parts of the East Midlands, that'll be almost non-existent next year. For Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, through the County Combined Authority, there will be some business support. It won't be at the same scale as it is this year. But then, of course, you've got things like local growth funds coming in and so forth. But of course, that's not universally available. So again, you know, you've got postcode lottery type business support mechanisms. I think the second thing is very much around skills. You know, a skills landscape that's easy for businesses to navigate. You know, despite the emergence of things like T levels, V levels, and so forth, you know, the vast majority of our businesses that are looking to recruit will still say they find it very hard to get the right volume of people with the right skills at the right time. Mm-hmm. So greater reform around skills. You know, we've got colleges, universities doing some brilliant stuff. But how do we get that much more integrated with what the private sector wants? So, and then I think, you know, for the East Midlands, you come back to infrastructure. You know, infrastructure is really important. You know, we're in Nottingham. It's got a great USP, which is its tram system. You know, really easy to get in and out of the city centre cost effectively. But, you know, we've also got some, you know, road bottlenecks that make getting round more challenging, particularly in the more rural areas. But, you know, I was at the Freeport launch event of their motorway M1 Junction 24 project in Westminster a couple of weeks ago. You know, how that changes to be able to accommodate all the growth potential around that sort of golden triangles sort of area. So I think it's really simple. It is about business support. It's about skills. It's about transport infrastructure. Well, I've said it sounds simple, but it's eluded as a region. It's eluded us for some time. But of course, with devolution and other things, you know, some of those things are in the grasp now. You know, so again, you should see massive transformation in the next sort of 5, 6, 7 years.
Right. Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
That's
you,
okay.
Scott.
You're welcome.